It's just dirt, Andrea. Take the dirt and get out of my sight. My brother Julian didn't even look up from his crystal glass of Macallan as he flicked a rusted, dirt-caked key across the mahogany conference table. It skittered past the expensive legal briefs and hit my chest before clattering to the floor. Around us, the lawyers in their $4,000 suits suddenly found their polished shoes very interesting. Julian had just successfully maneuvered the legal system to claim the entire $15 million estate. He got the penthouses in Manhattan, the liquid cash, the offshore accounts, and the luxury car collection. He left me Blackwood Farm, a 300-acre skeleton of gray wood and cracked earth that hadn't grown a single blade of grass in 30 years. To Julian, it was a toxic asset, a tax liability he used to balance his books. To me, it was the only thing I had left after he'd spent the last year systematically dismantling my career in logistics and freezing my personal bank accounts. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I reached down, picked up the rusted key, and tucked the tattered map of the property into my bag. "Enjoy the penthouses, Julian," I said, my voice as cold as the air conditioning in the room. "But remember, the loudest person in the room usually has the emptiest pockets. And I'm done being your silent partner." He laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed off the glass walls. "It's a landfill, Andrea. You're inheriting a pile of dust. Don't come crawling back when you realize you can't eat dirt." I walked out without looking back. I remembered my grandfather's voice from 20 years ago, a whisper in the wind as we walked those very fields. "Andrea, remember this. Gold isn't just under the ground, it's inside the time." At the time, I thought he was talking about patience. I didn't realize he was giving me a literal roadmap to an empire. The drive to Blackwood took 5 long, suffocating hours. As the city skyline faded into the rearview mirror, the heat began to rise until the air shimmered like liquid glass. By the time I reached the front gates, the thermometer on my dashboard read 106 degrees. The iron gates were rusted shut, choked by dead vines that looked like skeletal fingers. The farm was worse than the photos. The main house was a Victorian ghost, its windows shattered like empty eye sockets. The barns were leaning at impossible angles, their red paint long ago bleached to a sickly, bone-white gray by the unforgiving sun. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Julian. "Don't bother unpacking. I've already signed the preliminary intent to turn Blackwood into an industrial waste site. You're just a glorified house sitter until the bulldozers arrive in 60 days. Don't get too much dirt under your fingernails. It wouldn't suit a girl with your education." I looked at the parched earth. Julian had used a legal loophole to label this land as agriculturally dead and ecologically compromised. By doing so, he avoided the inheritance tax and set himself up for a massive payout from a waste management conglomerate. He thought he was a genius. He thought he had buried me alive in a grave of dust. But Julian forgot that I spent every summer here while he was off at prep school learning how to exploit people. I was the one who helped Grandpa in the cellar. I was the one who helped him grease the gears of the old machinery. If this story of betrayal hits close to home for you, like this video quietly, I had $500 in my pocket and a bag of basic tools. For the first 3 weeks, I lived on protein bars and gallon jugs of lukewarm water. I had no electricity. I used a portable solar array to charge my phone and a high-powered LED headlamp to navigate the sagging hallways of the house at night. The silence was absolute, broken only by the dry wind whistling through the cracks in the wood. I began my audit. I didn't start with the house. I started with the logistics of the land. I spent my days trekking across the cracked soil with a digital pH tester and a geological drill. The official state report said the land was toxic, but as I pulled my own core samples from 60 feet down, I found a staggering anomaly. The soil wasn't dead. It was resting. Underneath the top layer of sun-scorched clay was a subterranean mineral shelf that acted as a natural filter for an underground spring. The water down there wasn't just clean, it was enriched with rare minerals. On day 22, the heat peaked at 110 degrees. I was clearing the rotted floorboards of the north barn, a structure Julian had marked for immediate demolition. My heavy shovel hit something that sounded like a heavy metallic thud. 3 feet down, encased in a concrete vault, I pulled out a heavy lead box, sealed with industrial wax. Inside were hundreds of small glass vials, each labeled in Grandpa's meticulous handwriting. They weren't filled with diamonds. They were filled with seeds. Tiny, midnight purple kernels that looked like polished obsidian. This was black gold corn, a legendary heirloom variety thought to be extinct. It was a hyper-efficient superfood capable of pulling nitrogen directly from the atmosphere, producing a grain so rich it tasted like smoked butter and natural wood fire. Comment the word RECIPT if you want to see the moment the tables finally turn. I followed the maps in the ledger to a hidden vault behind the cellar wall. It was cool, dry, and smelled of fine oil. This was the horological vault. Grandpa had spent 40 years as a ghost watchmaker for the world's elite. On the shelves sat 50 of the rarest watches ever made, Patek Philippe's and vintage Rolexes worth over $12 million. Because Julian was so desperate to avoid taxes, he had legally classified the entirety of contents at Blackwood as inert industrial waste in his sworn affidavits to the court. I used 2 Rolexes as collateral for a $3 million bridge loan. Within 48 hours, I transformed this graveyard into a high-precision construction site. I didn't just hire laborers. I hired a specialized task force of agricultural engineers, soil biologists, and logistics experts. The renovation of Blackwood was a masterclass in clinical efficiency. While Julian was drinking champagne in the city, my team was working 24/7 inches 110-degree heat. First, we tackled the water. We didn't dig primitive trenches. We used a horizontal directional drilling rig to tap into the mineral spring 200 feet below the surface. We installed an Israeli-designed subterranean drip irrigation network. Every single seed was connected to a moisture sensor and a computerized nutrient delivery system. By delivering water directly to the root zone under the soil, we eliminated evaporation and ensured that every drop of mineral-rich liquid was put to use. Second, we performed a surgical soil bioactivation. Based on Grandpa's journals, we didn't dump synthetic chemicals that would kill the land. Instead, we injected tons of activated organic humus and indigenous microbe tea, cultured specifically from the original soil samples I found in the cellar. We were waking up the land's immune system, turning 3 decades of dormancy into a biological explosion. Third, the logistics. I treated the farm like a secure tech campus. We fortified the perimeter with thermal imaging cameras and vibration sensors. The barns weren't just repaired. They were converted into climate-controlled processing centers with HEPA filtration to handle the delicate black gold harvest. The black gold corn sprouted with terrifying speed, fueled by the mineral water and the revitalized earth. The plants were a deep, majestic purple-green. But the true miracle was the nutritional profile. Lab tests showed the corn had 10 times the antioxidant levels of normal grain and a protein structure that melted at body temperature. The flavor was something out of a dream, earthy, sweet, and incredibly creamy. The moment I sent samples to the top 3-star Michelin chefs in New York, London, and Tokyo, the culinary world went into a frenzy. They described it as the Wagyu of grains. Elite restaurants began clamoring for exclusive rights, pre-ordering the entire harvest a year in advance at an astronomical $150 per cob. We were sold out before the first ear was even picked. I was sitting on a multi-million-dollar gold mine that smelled like fresh butter. Julian called me on day 60. "Andrea, I'm coming with the bulldozers tomorrow. I've sent a DocuSign to your email. It's a final asset waiver. It basically says you've cleared out your personal junk so we can start the bulldozing. If you don't sign it by 5 p.m., I'm calling the sheriff to have you forcibly removed for trespassing." I made my voice sound small, shaky. "Julian, please. I've worked so hard on the garden. Everything is finally starting to turn green. Just give me until the end of the season?" He laughed so hard he coughed. "Turn green? Andrea, you're delusional. The land is dead. Sign the paper or sleep in a ditch." "I'll sign it," I whispered. "But only if you sign the unlisted property and scrap release. I found some old iron pipes and rotted tractors in the barn. I want to sell them to a scrapyard so I can afford a deposit on an apartment in the city." "Iron pipes? Scrap them. Take the trash, Andrea. It suits you." Julian signed the release in less than 60 seconds. He didn't even open the PDF attachment. If he had, he would have seen the specific legal definitions I had inserted. The document legally transferred ownership of all unlisted personal property, mechanical instruments, and biological assets within the boundaries of Blackwood to me. In his mind, he was letting me have some rusted metal. In reality, he was handing me the watches and the crop. The next day, Julian arrived in a convoy of black SUVs. He was wearing a white linen suit, looking like a colonial governor. He had a crew of 20 men and 3 massive yellow bulldozers idling at the gate. He stepped out and froze. The rusted gates were gone. In their place stood a massive, reinforced steel entrance with a digital security keypad. The toxic asset signs had been replaced by a gold-lettered monument. Blackwood Organic Research Estate. The air didn't smell like dust. It smelled like life. The black gold corn stood tall, a vibrant, deep emerald green that seemed to glow against the dark soil. The leaves rustled in the wind like silk. "What is this?" Julian roared, marching toward the gate. I was standing on the porch of the farmhouse, which had been scrubbed, painted, and restored to its original Victorian glory. I was wearing a crisp silk shirt and the 1965 Rolex Daytona on my wrist. "Welcome home, Julian," I said. "I have the bulldozers right here, Andrea. I'm tearing this whole thing down. Open this gate." I held up a thick, leather-bound folder. "You can't, Julian. 3 days ago, the Federal Bureau of Agricultural Preservation issued a critical biogenetic heritage order for this property. The black gold corn is now an endangered species. By federal law, this land cannot be developed, paved, or used for waste management for the next 99 years. Julian's face turned a shade of purple that almost matched the corn seeds. You trapped the land? I'll sue you. I own the deed. I'll have you thrown in jail for interfering with my contract." "You do own the deed," I smiled, stepping down from the porch. "But the deed is now a liability. You can't build your landfill. You can't sell it to the waste company. And since the land is locked in preservation, its market value just crashed from $10 million to roughly zero. In fact, since you lied on your tax returns by claiming the land was toxic, you now owe the state $400,000 in back taxes and penalties for environmental misrepresentation." Julian's phone began to vibrate incessantly. It was his bank. I watched his eyes dart back and forth as he read the notifications. His collateral, the Blackwood property, had been revalued at zero. His margin calls were triggering on his city penthouses. His lifestyle was evaporating in real time. "You stole this from me!" he roared, lunging toward the fence. "That corn, that money, it's mine!" "No, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried through the fence. "The corn belongs to the future. And the scrap metal you gave me? It's currently sitting in a private vault in the city. 50 watches, Julian. $12 million in horological history." I raised my wrist. The 1965 Rolex Daytona sparkling brilliantly in the harsh afternoon sun. "Grandpa's watch is beautiful, isn't it, Julian?" I said, raising my wrist so the light caught the dial. "It's a shame you never had the patience to wind it." Julian collapsed against the hood of his Ferrari. But the final payoff was just beginning. A silver sedan pulled up behind Julian's SUVs. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They weren't developers. "Mr. Julian Blackwood?" the lead man asked. He held up a badge. "I'm Special Agent Miller with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. We've been reviewing your sworn affidavits regarding the Blackwood estate. You claimed under penalty of perjury that this property held zero personal assets and was a non-productive waste site. However, we have a record of you signing a private transfer of $12 million worth of luxury timepieces and a multi-million-dollar agricultural asset to your sister just yesterday." Julian stuttered. I didn't know. She tricked me." "The law doesn't care if you're too arrogant to read your own contracts, Mr. Blackwood. What the law cares about is that you used those zero-value claims to evade millions in inheritance taxes. That's tax fraud, wire fraud, and misrepresentation of an estate." As the handcuffs clicked shut over Julian's silk sleeves, he looked at me with a mixture of hatred and pure, unadulterated shock. He had traded a global empire for a few years of luxury because he thought he was the only one who knew how to play the game. "Andrea, please!" he yelled as they pushed him into the back of the sedan. "We're family. You have to help me." "We were family, Julian," I said. "But then you sold my car for champagne. Now, you're just another line item on a ledger I've already closed." Today, Blackwood is the premier organic research facility in the world. We don't sell our produce to grocery stores. We provide the seed stock for the next generation of global agriculture. The legacy of Dust is now a brand worth more than Julian's entire stolen estate 10 times over. I kept the watches. I kept the seeds. And I kept that rusted key on a chain around my neck. It reminds me every day that the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you can see from a penthouse window. They're the ones you're willing to get your hands dirty for. Julian is currently serving 5 to 7 years in a federal facility. He has plenty of time now. I just hope he's learned how to use it. I didn't argue with him. I didn't beg him. I just opened the file. Subscribe for more stories where the receipts always win.